Welcome to this session on add fractions. We're going to join parts of fractions first and then move on to adding fractions. Now I have a pie here with 8 equal parts and I have selected one part of it, which is 1/8. Now I have another fraction 3/8 where I have 3 parts selected out of 8 equal parts. So let's see, all the 3 parts, each one of them represents 1/8 of the pie. Now, when I want to add these three 1/8s together to get 3/8, how do I do that? I have to use the plus sign. Now, what do I do next? Maybe I can add the numerators and denominators together. Okay, I do that. And in the numerator, I have 3, which is fine. But denominator shows 24, which is much more than the 8 equal parts that I have here. So obviously the denominator calculation is incorrect. All I need is an 8 here. So how did I do this calculation? I added the numerators together, but I'm dealing with the same whole with 8 parts. So same whole with 8 parts here. So I consider that one whole of 8 equal parts. So that is my one whole that has 8 equal parts. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind while adding parts of fractions. Now let's go ahead and add like fractions. I have two fractions here, 3/7 and 2/7. If you notice, the denominator is the same in this case. So it is the same whole that has 7 equal parts in it. Okay. Now, what are such fractions called? They are called as like fractions because the denominator is the same or they are like each other. Okay? They are same to same. Now, when I have like fractions, what did we do in the previous example? We added the numerators and we kept the denominator as is. We did not change it and we took it only one time. We did not add the denominators. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to add the numerators. I'll keep the denominator ones and then I get 5/7. Now this is how the 5/7 is represented. I have 7 equal parts out of which 5 different parts have been selected, which is this 5 parts. Okay. So when I have like fractions, I can add the denominators and I keep the denominator as is. I can add the numerators, keep the denominator as is and not add them. Okay. Now I can also have groups of things. And so here I have a group of 10 items out of which I selected 3 and then one item is selected out of 10. So how do I add them? I look at the denominator first and I say, hey, these are like fractions. So I'm going to add the numerators and I'm going to keep the denominator as is, which is just 10. So I add the numerators 3 plus 1, keep the denominator 10, and then I get 4/10. Something to keep in mind is we always want to simplify a fraction. So if the numerator and denominator have some factor in common or factors, then you just cancel them out and then simplify it. So we always need a simplified fraction. Now 4 is 2 times 2, 10 is 5 times 2. So I cancel out the two 2's and I get 2/5. Now let's switch to adding unlike fractions. Before that, let's join parts of unlike fractions and see what we can do. I have a fraction 1/3 to which I want to add a half. Now you see the denominators are not the same here. And also the parts look of different size. Now how do I add them? Maybe I can add just the numerators and denominators. Okay, I get 2/5. Now how do I represent this as a diagram? Maybe this is how I would do it. But the parts don't have the same size as before, and if I increase the size, then the whole which is divided into these different parts will be increasing. My whole cannot change, so obviously my calculation here is incorrect. This is one of the most common mistakes that people make, adding the numerators and denominators, which is incorrect. Please do not do that. Now let's see. If I have such fractions with different denominators, what are they called? They are called as unlike fractions. How do I add such unlike fractions when I have nothing in common? Probably I want to change them to like fractions. That means I'm going to make the denominators become the same. How do I do that? That I use equivalent fractions. Now, equivalent fractions, here's a small example. I have 1/3 fraction here. I take the same 1/3 and I see how I can come up with an equivalent fraction. Now, look at the blue part. I have divided the same blue part into two equal parts so that the size of the blue part remains the same as before, it has not changed. Now let's look at this white part. I'm going to take that and divide it into two equal parts, and same with the last one. Now what do I get? I get 2/6. But has anything changed with the whole of the fraction? Nope, it remains the same as before. We have just divided it further into smaller parts. So 1/3 is said to be equivalent to 2/6, or these two fractions are called as equivalent fractions. Now what do I do for equivalent fractions? I either multiply or divide the numerator and denominator with the same number. So I multiply 1/3 with, let's say I multiply it with 2, then I get 2/6. Now when I take 2/6 and I divide it by 2, what do I get? 1/3. So I get back my original fraction. So nothing much has changed with my fraction here. If I take 5/7 and multiply it in the numerator and denominator by 3, I get 15 by 21. When I take 15 by 21, I divide the numerator and denominator by 3. I get back my 5 by 7. So the value of the fraction has not changed. So that is something to keep in mind. Now I want to convert my unlike fractions to like fractions. Remember, we said with like fractions, it's very easy to add them. So I want to convert it. So what do I do now? I have to make the denominators the same. For that, I would need the LCM of 3 and 2. Please watch the video on how to find the LCM of two or more numbers. Then it will become clear to you on how to find the LCM. Now the LCM of 3 and 2 is 6. So I have to multiply 3 times 2 to get 6 and 2 times 3 to get 6. So I multiply the denominator by 2. But remember, we need equivalent fraction. We cannot just change the denominator of a fraction. We have to do the same to the numerator as we do with the denominator. So I'm going to multiply the numerator also with 2 and get 2 by 6. Now 1 by 2, I'm going to multiply it by 3 because I need a denominator of 6. So I get 3 by 6. Now I have taken 1/3 and one half, and I have converted them to their equivalent fractions, which are 2 by 6 and 3 by 6. So now you notice the denominators are the same. So these are like fractions. So I can go ahead and add the numerators, and then I get 5. The denominator remains the same as before, which is 6. Now I don't need to simplify this further because there is nothing common between 5 and 6. Now let's look at another example. I have 3 yummy ice creams, out of which I chose 2, 2/3. And then I have 4 ice creams, out of which I chose 3. So my fraction is 3/4. Again, notice the denominators. They are not the same. So these are unlike denominators or unlike fractions. So I need the LCM of 3 and 4, which is 12. So I have to multiply the denominator 3 with 4 to get 12. I have to do the same with the numerator here. So I have multiplied by 4. I take the fraction 3/4. I have to multiply it by 3 to get 12. So I do the same in the numerator. Now some people like to write this part together, 2 times 4 plus 3 times 3, and then divide it commonly by the common denominator of 3 by 4, which is 12. Now, what do I get out of this? 8 by 12. This is 9 by 12. So now I have the same denominators. So I add the numerators together. I get 17 by 12. Now this is an improper fraction, so you can keep it as is or write it as an improper fraction. Now there's another method called the cross multiply method. Let's see quickly how to do that. I have a fraction 5/6 to which I want to add 1/10. Notice denominators are not the same. So the cross multiply involves multiplying this numerator with this numerator with this denominator, and then I multiply this two denominators and that becomes my new denominator. So I get 5 times 10 is 50, 1 times 6 is 6, 6 times 10 is 60. So I get 56 by 60. Now this can be simplified further because it has a common factor of 4. I cancel out the 4 and get 14 by 15. So it's not that hard to add fractions. Keep practicing and you'll get better at it. Hope you enjoyed this session. Catch up with you in the next session. Thank you for watching.